In 1880, an English worker earned about $1 a day, roughly $32 today. With that single dollar, he could pay for rent, food, drinks, clothes, and still save a few cents. Today, that same $32 barely covers a food delivery for one person. In the next few minutes, you're going to see the unbelievable buying power and the hidden cost of a single dollar in the Victorian era. Number 1. In the Victorian era, with $1 you could buy almost a whole wardrobe. Sounds like a great deal, right? The problem was where those clothes came from. Most of them came straight off dead bodies, people who had died of smallpox, typhus, tuberculosis, and nobody washed or disinfected anything. The clothes went straight to the second-hand market. Entire families bought those clothes at street fairs without having the slightest idea of the danger. Health authorities at the time traced entire smallpox outbreaks back to specific batches of clothing sold in those markets. Children, women, workers, everyone was vulnerable. New clothes were a luxury ordinary people simply couldn't afford. So there was no choice. You wore whatever was available and hoped you wouldn't be the next victim. Every piece of clothing you bought was a gamble with your own life. Number 2. Before leaving the house, you needed 2 things or nobody took you seriously: a hat and a pair of boots. In the Victorian era, walking around without a hat was basically like telling the world you had nothing. People treated you like a beggar. It didn't matter if it was new or old, you needed one on your head. A used hat cost a few cents. Patched up boots, same thing. With $1, you could cover your head and your feet and still have change left over. Cobblers back then made more money repairing old boots than selling new ones. Nobody asked where the hat came from or who it had belonged to before. What mattered was being dressed properly so people would treat you like a human being. It was pure survival, nothing to do with fashion or appearance. Number 3. Dressed and wearing shoes, the next problem was hunger. With $1, you could buy bread, cheese, cured meat, and still have change left over. Sounds like a good deal, right? But there was one detail that could kill you. The milk you gave your children was mixed with sewer water. The nice white bread from the bakery had plaster mixed into the dough to give it that color. And if you bought a green candy for Christmas, there was a good chance you were eating arsenic. This wasn't some isolated case or one dishonest seller in a dark alley. It was the standard across the market. Everybody did it. There were no inspections, no labels, no nothing. Thousands of people were slowly poisoned to death before any government decided to create a food safety law. The dollar bought a lot of food, but the real price was paid in years of life. Number 4. Now pay attention to this part because it's genius. Bars in the Victorian era offered free food to customers. Ham, cheese, bread, all free. It sounded like a great deal. But there was a trick. The food was loaded with salt. Salt in the ham, salt in the cheese, salt in everything. The more a person ate, the thirstier he got, and the more beer he ordered. A worker would walk into the pub with $1 thinking he was saving money on lunch and leave that night without a cent in his pocket. All of it spent on drinks. Bar owners knew exactly what they were doing. And you know that famous phrase we still use today, "There's no such thing as a free lunch"? It literally came from this trick. It's not a metaphor. It was what happened every day in those places. Modern marketing didn't invent anything. The Victorians had already mastered the art of making you spend money without realizing it. Number 5. But the worst part wasn't even the free food, it was the food you paid for out of your own pocket. In the Victorian era, butcher shops sold meat that was already going bad. To hide it, they washed the meat with chemicals and threw strong seasoning on top to cover the smell. For just a few cents, any family could buy meat. And that's exactly what made the situation dangerous. There were no refrigerators. There were no inspections. The only quality control was the buyer's nose. Even so, a lot of people brought spoiled meat home without realizing it. Food poisoning was so common that people simply thought it was normal to feel sick after eating. Nobody blamed the butcher. Nobody questioned the meat. Vomiting and stomach pain were just part of everyday life, like anything else. Number 6. With a full stomach came the thirst. And in the Victorian era, quenching that thirst could ruin a life. Gin was so cheap it cost less than bread. A glass went for 1 penny. With $1, you could buy enough to knock out an entire family for days straight. And that's not an exaggeration. Some neighborhoods in London had streets where 5-year-old children drank gin with breakfast because it was cheaper than milk. Distilleries produced it with no real control and mixed in turpentine to stretch it further. The smell of juniper and vomit filled entire blocks. The problem got so bad that the British Parliament had to pass emergency laws to try to slow down consumption. That elegant image we have of the Victorian era, with ladies in long dresses and gentlemen in top hats, doesn't show the other side. In the alleys of London, gin was more destructive than any illegal drug today. Number 7. But there was one drink the Victorians treated as sacred. With $1, you could buy enough tea to last for weeks. The problem was that a lot of that tea was fake. Merchants mixed used tea leaves with sawdust, sand, and even lead to give it that nice color. Ordinary people drank it every day, thinking they were having something refined. In reality, they were slowly poisoning themselves. And the heaviest part is that England fought actual wars just to keep tea cheap. They invaded China twice because of it. They forced millions of Chinese people to consume opium just to balance the tea trade. All of that so a worker in London could drink his morning cup without complaining about the price. $1 bought weeks' worth of tea, but nobody really knew what was inside that cup. Number 8. And when tea was too expensive, beer was the fallback. With $1, you could buy dozens of mugs in Victorian England. But here's the detail most people don't know. In much of the industrial cities, tap water was contaminated with sewage. Drinking water could kill you. Beer, on the other hand, went through fermentation, a process that killed bacteria. So it wasn't about taste, it was about survival. Workers drank beer with breakfast before heading to the factory. And it doesn't stop there. Children drank a watered-down version called small beer with almost no alcohol. It was the safest thing they had to stay hydrated. The line between quenching your thirst and alcoholism basically didn't exist back then. $1 gave you access to the most reliable liquid available, and it was alcoholic. Number 9. Fed and drunk. The next problem was impossible to ignore: the smell. Most homes had no plumbing at all. Bathing was something a lot of people simply didn't do very often. There were public baths that charged a few cents per visit. With $1, you could pay for several baths over the course of a month. But here's the detail nobody tells you. Dozens of people used the same tub without the water being changed. You got into water that had already been used by sick people, dirty workers, and who knows who else. And the government didn't build those public baths out of generosity. Cholera and typhus were spreading fast, and they started killing rich people too. Once disease crossed the line between poor neighborhoods and wealthy ones, that's when the authorities finally acted. Hygiene wasn't about comfort, it was a survival policy. Number 10. In the Victorian era, bathing every week was something only rich people could afford. The average worker could go days without even seeing a bathtub. And when you packed hundreds of people into a closed space with no ventilation, the smell was enough to turn your stomach. So perfume wasn't about vanity, it was about social survival. With $1, you could buy several bottles of it. These weren't fancy perfumes from France. They were simple mixes of alcohol and cheap floral oils, often of questionable quality. And it wasn't just women who used them. Men, children, workers, everyone put something on to cover up the smell. In factories, on streetcars, in packed Sunday churches, cheap perfume was as essential as soap. Actually, more essential, because soap wasn't always available. So, when you see someone from that time holding a small bottle, understand this: that was the bare minimum to be near another person without making them feel sick. Number 11. After a long, exhausting day, the Victorian worker needed a place to forget about life. And that place was the music hall. Think of it as a huge bar with a stage. Comedians, singers, acrobats, magicians. Everything happened there all at once. Admission cost just a few cents, so with $1 you could go several nights a week. It was the most popular entertainment there was before movies came along. But what a lot of people don't know is what went on behind the scenes. Prostitution, gambling, and fights were all part of the package. The authorities were always trying to shut those places down, but they never could because the crowds were huge. Millions of people went every week. It was on those loud, smoky stages that what we now call pop culture was born. Stand-up comedy, popular music, variety shows, it all started there. With $1, you had the best entertainment money could buy back then. Number 12. But the most popular entertainment in the Victorian era was also the most disturbing. For just a few cents, anyone could walk into so-called freak shows. They were spectacles where men, women, and even children with rare medical conditions were displayed on stages as if they were circus attractions. Joseph Merrick, known as the Elephant Man, was one of the most famous cases. He suffered from a disease that deformed his bones and skin, and for years he was exhibited in packed tents across London. The audience paid, walked in, stared, and left as if they had just seen any normal show. Entire families watched together. Parents brought their children without thinking twice. Nobody protested. Nobody thought it was wrong. It was simply the entertainment of that time, and that's the part that's disturbing, because the discomfort you feel now hearing this is exactly what nobody felt back then. Number 13. But the most addictive spectacle wasn't on any stage. It was at the newspaper stands. 1 penny bought you an issue. With $1, you could take home dozens of copies. And here's the detail most people don't know. The Victorian press practically invented sensationalism the way we know it today. Editors figured out that fear sold far better than any ordinary news story. Jack the Ripper, for example. The crimes were real, but the legend was built by journalists who exaggerated details, made up witnesses, and published more and more grotesque illustrations. Not because they wanted to inform people, but because every more shocking edition meant more sales the next day. $1 spent on newspapers in the Victorian era didn't just buy paper. It bought the power to decide what an entire city was going to believe that week. Number 14. And wherever there was a crowd, there was gambling. In the Victorian era, with just a few cents, you could bet on anything. Horse races, dog fights, street corner lotteries. With $1, you could place dozens of bets throughout the day. But the thing is, most of those games were rigged. Professional con artists set up booths at fairs and markets with games that were literally impossible to win. Ordinary workers lost an entire week's wages in a matter of minutes. The promise of changing your life with one lucky bet was the perfect bait. And it worked every time, because the hope of getting rich fast didn't need to make sense. It just needed to exist. And back then, just like today, there was always someone ready to profit off that hope. Number 15. And when entertainment wasn't enough, the pharmacy sold forgetfulness. Laudanum was basically opium dissolved in alcohol. You could walk into a Victorian pharmacy, ask for a bottle, and walk out without anyone asking you a single question. No prescription, no record, no judgment. With $1, you could buy enough bottles to last for weeks. Mothers gave drops to babies to make them stop crying. Housewives took it to calm their nerves. Writers used it to spark creativity. Society as a whole was drowning in opiates and calling it medical treatment. Nobody saw it as addiction because the bottle came from a respectable pharmacist. If that reminds you of something that happened in the United States over the last few decades, that's not a coincidence. History has that irritating habit of repeating itself. Number 16. $1 bought enough tobacco to last for weeks. Cigars went for 2 or 3 cents each. Chewing tobacco was even cheaper, and everybody used it. Men, women, and even children. In factories, chewing tobacco was the only allowed vice, because cigarettes could throw sparks near machinery. That's why spittoons were part of the decor in any public place. Bars, offices, even Congress had spittoons on the chamber floor. Diseases of the mouth were common, but nobody linked that to tobacco. The medicine of the time simply didn't make that connection. Smoking or chewing was considered as natural as eating breakfast. It was a habit that crossed every social class without anyone questioning it. Number 17. But the quietest addiction of the Victorian era was something else. In the poor neighborhoods of London, for just a few cents, a woman could sell her own body. With $1, a man could make several visits in the same night. Most of these women came from the working class, factories that paid next to nothing, husbands who died young, children to feed. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. And the price was brutal. Venereal diseases spread with no real treatment. Violence was part of everyday life. These women had shockingly short life expectancies. But here's the detail most people don't know. A small few managed to save money, open their own establishments, and became respected business owners behind the scenes. But for everyone who moved up, thousands were trapped in that cycle. Every coin they received bought them only one more day of life. Number 18. And when sickness came knocking, what Victorian medicine had to offer was often almost worse than the problem itself. With $1, you could buy several bottles of elixirs that claimed to cure everything from toothaches to tuberculosis. The detail is enough to make your skin crawl. Mercury, lead, opium, and generous amounts of alcohol were on the ingredient list. Salesmen put on full-blown street shows, even using actors pretending to be patients cured on the spot. Mothers gave syrups with opiates to small children to make them sleep, without the slightest idea what they were really doing. Thousands died from being poisoned by medicines bought legally. And the government? It did nothing. There was no law requiring those guys to say what was inside the bottle. That only changed in 1906 with the Pure Food and Drug Act. Until then, the medicine killed more than the disease itself. Number 19. And why did so many people take poison thinking it was medicine? Simple. Because a real doctor was something only rich people could afford. In the Victorian era, a single appointment could cost more than what a worker earned in entire weeks. With $1, you couldn't even get close to seeing a trained doctor. So what was left for the working class? Street healers, barbers pulling teeth with no anesthesia, and pharmacists mixing whatever into a bottle and calling it a cure. Mercury, opium, arsenic, all of it was sold as legitimate treatment. And the worst part is that people knew it was risky, but they had no choice. Either you paid a few cents for some questionable medicine, or you just waited for the illness to pass, or not. The difference between living and dying in the Victorian era didn't depend on the disease you had, it depended on how much money you had in your pocket. Number 20. In the Victorian era, dying was more expensive than living. Even a simple funeral could cost months' worth of wages. With $1, you could barely pay for the cheapest coffin available. Poor families paid a few cents every week into a kind of funeral insurance, praying they'd have enough when the worst finally came. And the worst came often. Children died in huge numbers, and many of them stayed in the house for days because their parents simply couldn't afford the burial. Here's what brings this whole story together. $1 could buy food, entertainment, fake medicine, and small pleasures throughout an entire life, but it couldn't buy a dignified death. Back then, every cent told a story of inequality and the struggle to survive. The real price of everything wasn't paid in money, it was paid in health, dignity, and years of life.